Good timing. We're going through 4chan material tonight that's deeply unsettling. Threads that are real and twisted. Like the video, subscribe, volume high, and let's start. The dare was Cole's idea, which shouldn't have surprised anyone. We were sitting in the back of his brother's truck outside of Casey's in some town off Highway 6, drinking the flat Mountain Dew we'd bought an hour earlier, and he pointed across the road at the field. "Bet you won't cross it," he said. "Straight through, come out the other side." There were 4 of us. Cole, his cousin Dev, a kid we called Beans because he wouldn't shut up about a chili he'd made in July, and me. It was August, and the corn was that late season tall where it goes over your head by a foot, and the stalks are dry enough to sound like paper when the wind moves through them. I said fine, I don't know why. I think I wanted the ride home to be quiet for once, and the only way to shut Cole up was to do the thing he was daring. The field was big. That part I remember clearly. From the road, it looked like it had an end because you could see the far tree line in the day, but at night the tree line was just a darker patch of dark, and I didn't clock how far away it actually was until I was already 50 feet in. I had my phone, battery at 60-something, flashlight on. The corn closed behind me almost immediately, and by the time I turned back to wave at the truck, I couldn't see the road anymore. I could still hear them though. Cole was yelling something and Dev was laughing. I started walking. The plan was simple. Keep going in one direction, come out somewhere on the other side, walk back around on the shoulder. Should take 20 minutes. The rows weren't straight. That's the first thing nobody tells you. From the highway, you think a cornfield is a grid, like graph paper, and you can just pick a line and follow it. It's not like that at night. The rows curve where the planter turned. Some rows dead end into other rows. You step over a broken stalk, and suddenly you're between 2 rows going the other way. After about 10 minutes, I couldn't hear the truck anymore. I stopped and listened. Wind in the dry leaves. That was it. No cars, no dogs, no music from any farmhouse. Just that dry rustle that sounds a little like rain if you don't know what it is. I checked my phone. No service. That surprised me for a second, and then it didn't, because I remembered Dev complaining about no signal at the Casey's too. I kept walking. The problem showed up slow. I'd been going, in my head, north. The road was south, so if I turned around and went south, I'd hit the road. Easy. Except when I turned around, the corn looked exactly the same. Same height, same spacing, same dry sound. I picked a direction and walked for what I thought was 5 minutes, and the field just kept going. I stopped again, tried to look at the sky for stars. The sky was there, but I couldn't tell you which way was which. I don't know how to read stars. Nobody taught me that. I walked more. Faster now. My shoes were catching on the ground because the dirt between rows isn't flat, it's mounded, and I kept rolling my ankle on the ridges. I hit a stalk with my shoulder, and it snapped at the base and folded down in front of me. That was when I noticed the broken stalk on the ground looked just like one I'd stepped over maybe 2 minutes back. Same angle, same break. I told myself it wasn't the same one. There are a million stalks. But I stood there with my flashlight on it for probably too long, and the thing I couldn't stop noticing was that the dirt right next to it had a shoe print in it. My shoe print. I was walking in circles. I've read about people doing that, something about one leg being slightly stronger than the other. Reading about it and standing in it are different. I got hot in my chest, not scared yet, not fully, just this pressure like when you're about to be in trouble and you don't know how bad it's going to be. I yelled, "Cole," then louder, "Cole, this isn't funny." Nothing came back, not even an echo, because corn doesn't echo, it absorbs. Phone was at 41%. I turned the flashlight off to save it and immediately turned it back on because it was so dark I couldn't see my own hand. I don't know how long I walked after that. 20 minutes maybe. I'd stop, listen, walk again. I was talking to myself out loud, the kind of thing you don't admit later. Little sentences. Okay, keep going. It ends somewhere. Then I heard the voice. It came from my left. Not close, not far. A man's voice. Older, calm, the way somebody talks when they're asking you to move your car out of their driveway. He said, "Left." Just that. One word. I froze. I said, "Hello?" My own voice sounded thin. He didn't answer that. After a couple seconds, he said, "Left." Then straight. I want to be honest about this part. I didn't think, "Oh good, help." I thought, that's a stranger in a cornfield in the middle of the night and I don't know him. I stood there with my flashlight pointed toward where the voice was, and I could see maybe 3 rows of corn, and after that, nothing. He said it again. Left, straight. I turned left. I don't fully know why. Maybe because standing still was worse. Maybe because his voice didn't have anything in it. No push, no impatience. Just a person telling me a direction, like he'd told a lot of people the same thing before. I walked. After a bit, he said, "Still straight." Then a minute later, "Little bit more." He never got closer and never got farther. I couldn't figure out where he actually was. The corn moves sound around in a weird way. It flattens it, and I'd have sworn he was 50 feet off one moment and right beside the next row over the next. Then he said, "You're almost out. Keep going." And the corn ended. I stumbled out into a strip of cut grass, maybe 10 feet wide, and past that was a gravel track, and past that a fence. There was a light bobbing on the gravel. An old kerosene lantern, the real kind, and behind it a man in a Carhartt jacket holding the handle low so it wouldn't blind me. He was older, 70 maybe, big gray mustache, hands like he'd used them for a living. He looked me over once and said, "You all right, son?" Not a question. "A check." I said, "Yeah." I said I got turned around. He nodded like he already knew that. "This is my field," he said. "I heard you a while back. You were walking a circle over by the low spot." "Happens." I asked how he knew where I was. "Sound," he said. "Corn's dry this time of year. You can hear a person moving in it from a ways off if you know what to listen for." I was up on the porch. I asked if he'd been the one talking to me. He said yeah. Said he didn't want to come in after me because 2 people walking in the dark is worse than 1, and if I heard him, I'd come to him faster than he could get to me. I said thanks. It sounded stupid. He shrugged. Said it happens a few times every summer. Kids on a dare mostly. He said he keeps the lantern by the door in August. He walked me back around to the road, which turned out to be a lot closer than I thought, maybe a quarter mile along the fence line. The truck was still there. Cole and Dev and Beans were on the tailgate looking at their phones. When they saw me, they yelled, but I don't remember what. Before I got in, the old man said, "You want to know how not to get lost in there? Come by tomorrow. Daylight, I'll show you." I said okay, mostly to be polite, but I went. Next afternoon, told Cole I was going to my aunt's and drove out alone. The old man was in the yard with a dog. He walked me to the edge of the field and showed me how the rows actually run, how the planter turns, leave a curve you can read, how you find the drainage low spot and use it as a line, how the wind usually moves one way this time of year and you can feel it on the same cheek if you're going straight. He said the sun's angle at any hour tells you south if you pay attention for 30 seconds. It took maybe an hour. I thought I'd be bored. I wasn't. On the way out, he asked if I'd been scared the night before. I said yeah, some. He said good. Said that meant I'd remember it. I still drive past that field sometimes. Corn's usually up. I don't go in. The pallet by Press 3 had roughly 2,000 sheets on it when I unlocked the shop that morning, and none of those sheets were there when I'd left the night before. I run graveyard at a small commercial printer off Grand River, west side of Detroit. Nothing fancy. We do menus, church bulletins, wedding invites, sometimes short-run books for people who self-publish. 4 presses, 3 offset, 1 digital. I was hired in September of 2020, so by March of 2021, I'd had 6 months of the same routine. Come in at 10, sweep the loading area, check the schedule, run whatever the day crew set up, wrap at 6. The shop always smelled like ink and machine oil, and whatever the guy on second shift heated up in the microwave. That March, it also smelled like the little space heater the day crew ran next to their workstation, because the heat in the front office kept cutting out. Ink and oil and burnt dust. That's what I remember. That week, the big Heidelberg Online 3 was down for scheduled maintenance. Rollers pulled, blankets off, the guts of it laid out on the drip tray under fluorescent light. Nothing was supposed to touch it until the tech came back Wednesday morning to reassemble. Monday I did my shift, ran a job on line 1, a stack of takeout menus for a Coney Island place on Michigan Avenue. Locked up at 6 a.m., set the alarm, drove home, slept until 4 in the afternoon, ate a sandwich standing at my counter, came back at 10. The pallet was the first thing I saw. I remember stopping in the doorway with my coffee still lifted halfway to my mouth. 2,000 sheets, give or take, stacked neat on a wooden pallet next to Press 3. Not fanned out like a bad run, squared up like someone had jogged them by hand. The pallet hadn't been there the night before. I would have walked past it 4 times just to get to my locker. I set the coffee down on the workbench and walked over. The press was cold. I put my hand flat on the side panel where the motor housing sits and felt nothing. A Heidelberg that's been running that day holds heat for a long time. This one had the same temperature as the concrete floor. The rollers were still pulled. The blankets were still off. The maintenance tags were still hanging where the tech had left them Friday. None of it made sense. You can't run a press with the rollers out. You physically can't. There's no way to move ink onto the plate, and there's no plate loaded, and the impression cylinder wasn't torqued down. I checked all of that twice before I picked up a sheet from the top of the stack. It was white paper, 60-pound house stock, the same stuff we use for everything short of glossy work. The printing was clean and dry and sharp. It looked like a normal page of a normal book, dense with text, small margins. The text was in a language I didn't recognize. I want to be clear about this because it's the part I've thought about the most. It wasn't gibberish, It wasn't a font glitch or language I half recognized and couldn't place. The characters were tight and deliberate, with strokes that looped and hooked and stopped in ways that felt considered. Some had marks above them, like accents. Some had marks below. There was punctuation, or something that behaved like it. Paragraphs broke where paragraphs would break. There was even what looked like a footnote at the bottom of the page, in smaller type, with a superscript number next to it. I flipped to the next sheet, same page. I pulled 10 from the middle of the stack, same page. I went to the bottom, same page. Every single sheet in that stack was identical. I stood there with a fistful of paper and I laughed, honestly, not because it was funny, because my brain didn't know what to do with what my hands were holding. I said out loud, "Okay," to no one, and I put the sheets back on the pallet and I walked to the break room to sit down. I called my supervisor at 6 a.m. when I would have normally been locking up. He came in still zipping his jacket. He looked at the pallet. He looked at the press. He looked at me. He said, "Did you run this?" I told him no. I told him the press was cold. I told him the rollers were out. He put his hand on the housing the same way I had, and then he said we needed to pull the security footage. We watched it together in the office, on the little monitor above the desk. The system covered the loading dock, the front door, the press room floor from 2 angles, the back hallway. From the moment I locked up Monday morning until the moment I walked back in Monday night, no one entered the building. No one left. The presses did not move. Line 3 sat there in the corner of the frame for almost 20 hours, dark and still. The pallet appeared in none of the footage, not being wheeled in, not being placed, not being loaded. It was not there at 6:02 a.m. when I set the alarm. It was there at 9:58 p.m. when I walked back through the door. He asked me if I was messing with him. I said I wasn't. He believed me, I think, mostly because he could see my hands shaking when I lit a cigarette out on the loading dock, and he'd never seen me smoke before. The tech came Wednesday. He took the machine apart the rest of the way and checked everything. The plate cylinder was clean. The ink fountains were dry. The internal memory, where the press logs its last jobs, was empty. He said he'd only ever seen a log that clean on a machine fresh out of the factory. The pages sat in the corner of the shop for 2 days while my supervisor tried to decide what to do about them. On Friday, he told me to get rid of them. I loaded them into the dumpster out back and watched the compactor cycle. I kept one sheet folded in my jacket pocket without telling him. A friend of mine tutors ESL out in Hamtramck, and she knows a guy in the linguistics department at Wayne State. She got me 20 minutes with him in his office the following week. He held the page under a desk lamp and turned it a few different ways. He ran a finger along one of the lines. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "This isn't a language I know, but look here." He tapped one of the marks. This character appears 11 times on this page, always at the end of a cluster of 4 to 6 other characters. Never inside a cluster, never at the start. He looked up at me over his glasses. "That's grammar," he said. "This isn't random. Someone knew what they were doing." He asked where I'd gotten it. I told him a friend brought it back from a trip and wanted to know what it was. He said he'd love to look at more of it if I could get any. I said I'd ask. I never called him back. I still work nights. Different shop, out in Warren now. I left the old place in July. The page is on the wall of my apartment next to the kitchen doorway. I framed it about a year ago because the paper was starting to yellow at the edges and I didn't want to lose it. My girlfriend asked me once what it said. I told her I didn't know. She asked why I kept it. I couldn't really answer her. I look at it in the morning when I'm pouring coffee. I look at it at night when I'm turning out the lights. I've stopped trying to read it the way you stop trying to read a painting after a while. It's just there. I've gotten used to it. The call came in around 4 in the afternoon, a break-in on a cul-de-sac off Kirby Whitten in Bartlett. Nothing rushed about it. Patrol had already cleared the house. The homeowners were sitting on the porch with their dog, and dispatch said the owners weren't even sure anything was missing. That's the kind of scene you don't dread on the drive over. You expect prints on a doorframe, maybe a tool mark on a jamb, paperwork, home in 2 hours. I was on trace that day. Marcus had the camera, Dee was on evidence collection, and our supervisor, Wes, stayed in the van most of the time working the log. It was one of those Memphis afternoons where the pollen sat so thick on the hood of the car it looked painted on, and every driveway on the block had a yellow ring around the storm drain. The back door had been pried at the deadbolt. Cheap work. Whoever did it had used something flat, probably a pry bar, and split a chunk of the jamb clean off. No blood, no glove marks, no tool residue I could see with the naked eye. I told Marcus to shoot it wide, then close, then we moved inside. The homeowners had been sanding drywall in the guest bathroom for a week. That mattered because the whole first floor had a fine white powder on the hardwood, thin enough you'd miss it in the wrong light, thick enough to hold detail. When I crouched by the back door with the oblique flashlight low to the boards, the prints lit up like somebody had drawn them on with chalk. One set, work boots, aggressive lug pattern, probably a size 11, coming in. I called Marcus over and we started numbering. Print 1 just inside the threshold. Print 2, a stride and a half into the kitchen. The tread was clean, the pressure even. Whoever this was hadn't been running, hadn't been panicking. He walked in like he knew where he was going. The prints crossed the kitchen at an angle, went past the island, past a bag of dog food propped against the cabinet. In the hallway, they straightened out. Down the hall, past a coat closet, past a framed photo of the couple, at what looked like a beach in Destin. The prints did not stop at the closet. I checked. The powder in front of the closet door was undisturbed. They kept going into what the wife called the office. Small room, 10 by 11, one window with the blinds down. A desk, a filing cabinet, a bookshelf with paperbacks and a couple of trophies from a kid's soccer league. Nothing looked touched. The chair was tucked in. There was a coffee cup on the desk with dried film on the bottom. Been there a while. The prints crossed the office in a straight line and ended at the interior wall between the office and the primary bedroom. I mean ended. Both boots, left, right, toes to the drywall, weight distribution even across the impression. No lean, no scuff. Like a man had walked up to the wall and stood there and then not moved. I looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at me. He said, "You want me to shoot it?" And I said, "Yeah, shoot it." So he did. He took maybe 40 frames of that last pair of prints. Scale, no scale, oblique, overhead, the works. I checked the wall. Painted drywall, standard 8-foot ceiling, textured with that orange peel spray you see in every house built after 1995. I ran my palm across it in a grid. Solid. I tapped, listening for the change in tone that tells you there's a cavity or a patch. Same pitch all the way across. I got down on my knees and looked at the baseboard. Caulked and painted in, no fresh cut, no scuff. The floor met the trim clean. I ran a stud finder along it out of stubbornness and got the studs exactly where you'd expect them. I walked around to the primary bedroom to check the other side of that wall. It was just a wall, a dresser against it, an oil painting of a lake above the dresser. The dresser hadn't been moved in a long time. There was a rectangle of undisturbed carpet fibers around each of its feet. The painting had a spider web anchored in the top corner. There was no door. There was no hatch. There was no closet backing into that wall from either side. I know because I checked twice, and then I asked Dee to check, and she checked, and she came back and said, "There's nothing there," in the flat voice she uses when she thinks somebody's wasting her time. I went back to the office. The prints hadn't moved, which is a stupid thing to think, but I thought it. I stood over them and tried to make it work in my head. Somebody breaks in, walks the property, doesn't take anything, doesn't touch anything, and leaves. Fine. Except there was no return set. No second pass of the same tread going the other way. The powder behind the last prints was clean. I got low with the flashlight again and worked back along the route, room by room, looking for any sign the same boots had gone the other direction. There wasn't any. I thought about the possibility he'd taken his boots off and walked back barefoot. You'd see something. Sock fibers, skin oil, a partial. In powder that fine, you'd see a heel. There was nothing. I thought about him backing out. Walking backward in his own prints, foot in foot. It's a thing people do in movies. In real life, it leaves a smear. The edges of a print double up, the lug pattern doubles, the toe drags on the way out. These prints were single impression, crisp on all edges. He hadn't backed out of them. I stood there for what Wes later said was almost 20 minutes. I remember the sound of the refrigerator kicking on in the kitchen and the dog barking on the porch when the wife tried to bring him inside. That's what I remember from those 20 minutes. Not thinking, exactly. Just standing over 2 boot prints in drywall dust in a stranger's office with the light coming in the hall behind me at the wrong angle to help. Marcus said, "You good?" And I said, "Yeah, keep shooting." We processed the rest of the house. No prints upstairs, no prints in the garage. The back door was the only entry, and the front door was still dead-bolted from the inside when patrol arrived. The wife walked us through every room and kept saying, "It's all here, it's all here," in a voice that was starting to sound less like relief. Not the laptop on the office desk, not her jewelry, not the cash the husband kept in a coffee tin above the fridge. Nothing. I wrote the report that night at the office. I sat at my desk for a while with the cursor blinking in the narrative field. I ended up putting, "The intruder's route of travel could not be fully established. Impressions terminate at an interior wall of the office, with no observable continuation." Wes read it the next morning. He leaned in my doorway with his coffee and said, "You get that with powder substrates. Prints deform. Airflow shifts them. HVAC kicks on. They smear out. You'd be surprised. I said, "Yeah, I've seen that." He nodded and walked off. The prints had not deformed. There was no smear. There was no airflow gap in that room. The last two impressions were the sharpest in the whole set, sharper than the ones by the back door, and I had 38 photographs of them on the department server to prove it. I didn't say any of that. I signed the report. It got filed. The case sat open for a while, and then it got moved to inactive because nothing had been stolen and nobody had been hurt, and Bartlett PD had actual work to do. I've worked plenty of scenes since, some of them worse. I don't bring that house up. Once at a Christmas party, a guy from Latent asked me what the strangest thing I'd ever seen on a scene was, and I told him a story about a raccoon in a chimney, and everybody laughed, and I got another drink. The route sheet had me at the Galleria in North Dallas that Tuesday. 3 ATMs on the ground floor, one upstairs by the ice rink. Nothing unusual on paper. What was unusual was the mall itself. March 10th, 2020. You could feel people deciding whether to still be there. The food court was maybe a third full at lunch. A woman near the Nordstrom entrance was wiping down her stroller handle with a Clorox wipe like she was diffusing something. I'd been doing ATM service for about 6 years by then, 2 years with a small vendor out of Plano before I moved to the bigger contract work. The job sounds more interesting than it is. Most calls are receipt printers jamming, cash cassettes needing a swap, network hiccups. Real skimmer calls come in maybe 4 or 5 times a year, and always the same story. Someone at the branch spots a weird overlay on the card reader, a bezel that doesn't quite sit right, a pinhole where no pinhole should be. You pop it off, bag it, fill out a form, done. That day was supposed to be a routine cash swap and a firmware push on the standalone unit by the Cinnabon. The machine was one of those older through-the-wall installs the mall had grandfathered in from before the last renovation. Freestanding kiosk with a service door on the back that opens into a little utility corridor behind the Cinnabon and a T-Mobile stall. You need 2 keys and a code to get back there. I remember the corridor smelled like burnt sugar and industrial cleaner, and there was a mop bucket somebody had left with gray water in it. I opened the service door, logged in on the operator panel, ran the diagnostic. Everything green. Cash levels were low, so I pulled the cassettes, swapped them, and while I was in there, I figured I'd do a visual on the internals, because we'd had a memo the month before about people trying deep insert skimmers on this model. Deep insert is when they wedge a thin, flexible strip past the card reader mouth, so it sits inside the throat of the reader. Still not that hard to find if you know where to look. I didn't find a deep insert. That would have been normal. I found something taped to the top of the card reader housing with a piece of black electrical tape, about the size of a pack of gum, but flat. 2 thin ribbon cables running off it, one into the card reader's own board, one traced back and disappearing behind the CPU module. I stopped. You have to understand, the inside of an ATM is not something a customer ever sees. To get where I was standing, you need the machine keys, the safe combination for the lower half if you want the cash, and physical access to a locked corridor behind a locked service door. And once you're inside, everything is screwed down, ribbon cabled, labeled. Nobody tapes anything to anything in there. I took a photo with my phone, then another one with the flash off because the first one had glare. My hands were fine. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't panicking. It was more like the feeling you get when you walk into your own kitchen and a drawer is open that you know you closed. I peeled the tape back with a fingernail. The device wasn't just taped. Underneath the tape, 2 of its 4 contact points were soldered directly to pads on the card reader's controller board. Clean solder joints, not blobby, not amateur. Whoever did it had used flux and the right iron and probably a magnifier. I traced the second ribbon. It ran along the inside wall of the cabinet, held down with tiny dots of adhesive at regular intervals, and terminated at a small daughter board that had been mounted, again with clean solder work, to an unused header on the main board. There was no way this had been done in the field, not in a mall utility corridor with a mop bucket. This was a bench job. Somebody had sat at a workstation with this exact model in front of them, opened, unpowered, and taken their time. I called my dispatcher on the corridor side, not on the machine. Told her I had a suspected internal tamper, and I was going to shut the unit down and wait. She asked if I was safe. I said I was fine, which was true, but I remember I looked back down the corridor toward the service door twice while I was on the phone. There was nobody there. There was never anybody there. The corridor smelled like burnt sugar, and my own sweat now, and I could hear Circle of Life playing faintly through the wall from wherever the mall had its speakers zoned. I pulled the machine offline through the operator panel, locked the service door, waited by the front of the kiosk for about 40 minutes. A kid in a Mavs jersey tried to use it, and I told him the machine was down. Sorry. He shrugged and walked off. 2 teenage girls used the one across the way. Life was continuing. The bank sent a guy named Ray from their fraud desk, and a woman from corporate security whose title I never really caught. They asked me to walk them through exactly what I did. I did. Ray looked at the board for maybe 10 seconds and said quietly, "That's not fresh." I asked him what he meant. He didn't answer. He was already on his phone. The device came out of the machine that evening. I didn't do the extraction. A forensics contractor did, with someone from the bank filming it. I signed a chain of custody form on the corridor floor using the back of a clipboard, and I initialed each photograph they'd taken. Then I drove home to Richardson and sat in my apartment and ate cold pizza and watched the governor talk about what was and wasn't going to happen with the schools. I heard the rest of it in pieces over the next 3 months, some from Ray directly, some from a supervisor at the vendor, some from a compliance training we all had to sit through in July over Zoom. The device was not aftermarket. The solder had oxidation patterns consistent with a component that had been inside a sealed enclosure for over a year. The adhesive dots along the ribbon cable matched a brand used by a subcontractor overseas, not anything you'd buy at a Fry's. The daughter board silkscreen had a partial batch code that lined up with a production run from a specific quarter. The machine I'd been servicing had been installed at the mall almost 2 years earlier. It had been sitting there, working, taking cards, printing receipts, dispensing cash, the entire time. The bank pulled 20 other units from the same production batch. 7 of them had the same device inside. Same tape, same solder work, same ribbon run. Not identical positioning down to the millimeter, but close enough that the same hands had almost certainly done all of them. The other 13 were clean, or clean enough that nobody found anything. The manufacturer sued the component supplier. That part I only know because a link to a trade publication went around our work chat later that year. The filing talked about a breach in the supply chain at the assembly stage and named the supplier, but not any individuals. There were no criminal charges I ever heard about. Nobody I worked with heard about any either. I asked Ray once, when I ran into him at a different site months later, whose card data had actually gone out. How many people? He looked at me for a second and said, "You don't want that number." Then he changed the subject to something about a printer. I still service ATMs. I do the internal visual every single time now, even on machines I've opened 100 times. Even on models the memo didn't mention. I've never found another one. What bothers me is not that I might. What bothers me is that for 2 years, before I walked into that corridor behind the Cinnabon, 7 of those machines were doing exactly what they were built to do, and also something else, and nobody knew, and the cards kept going in. That's where we leave the door barely cracked open just in case. I appreciate you being brave enough to stay. Which narrative got deepest into your thoughts? Tell me below. There's a whole world of dark content waiting to be discovered. Keep your wits sharp. I'll be back.